In all my years on this bench, and we're talking over 40 years here, I thought I'd seen everything. Traffic violations that turned into shouting matches, theft cases where people cried about desperation, even assault cases where rage got the better of good people. But that cold February morning, something walked into my courtroom that made my blood run cold. Not anger, not desperation, not even rage. What I saw was something far more chilling: entitlement, mixed with absolute indifference to human life. Let me tell you about Brandon Collins. 24 years old, son of Mayor Thomas Collins, one of the most powerful men in Providence. When he walked through those courtroom doors at exactly 9:15 a.m., he didn't shuffle in like most defendants facing murder charges. No trembling hands, no pale face, no signs of sleepless nights. He strolled in wearing an Armani suit that probably cost more than most people in that courtroom made in 3 months. A Rolex presidential watch gleamed on his wrist. $10,000 easy, maybe more. Italian leather shoes so polished they reflected the courtroom lights. His hair was perfectly styled, his face cleanly shaved, and on his lips was something that made my stomach turn. A smirk. Not nervousness disguised as a smile, not the fake confidence of someone trying to hide their fear. A genuine smirk, like this entire proceeding was beneath his dignity, like he was annoyed to have to be here at all. Behind him came an army of legal representation. 3 attorneys, not one, not two. The kind of firepower that costs more per hour than a teacher makes in a week. Lead counsel was Richard Brennan, the most expensive criminal defense attorney in New England, known for getting wealthy clients acquitted on technicalities. They moved as a unit: expensive briefcases, tailored suits, expressions of professional confidence that said they'd done this 100 times before and won. But sitting in the first row of the gallery, looking small and broken, was someone who made my heart ache the moment I saw her. Rebecca Mitchell, 58 years old, wearing a simple black dress that looked like it had been pulled from the back of a closet for funerals. Her eyes were red and swollen from what must have been weeks of crying, months maybe. Dark circles underneath told me she hadn't slept properly in a long time. In her trembling hands, she clutched a photograph, holding it against her chest like it was the most precious thing in the world. Her face was a portrait of grief so deep it seemed to have carved lines that weren't there before. That photograph, I could see it even from my bench. A graduation photo of a young woman with bright eyes and a brilliant smile. Sarah Mitchell, 22 years old, Rebecca's only daughter. She'd been a student at Providence College, just 1 semester away from graduating with a degree in elementary education. She'd worked part-time at Henderson's Books downtown to help pay for school, saving every penny because her mother couldn't afford to help much. Colleagues said she was always early, always cheerful, always asking customers about their lives with genuine interest. She tutored kids in the neighborhood for free on weekends. She volunteered at the homeless shelter every Thursday night. By every account, Sarah Mitchell was the kind of young woman who made the world better just by being in it. Was. Past tense. Because Sarah Mitchell was dead, and Brandon Collins was charged with killing her. The charges were severe: second-degree murder, evidence tampering, and obstruction of justice. The case file sitting on my bench was thick, thicker than any file I'd handled in years. Inside were crime scene photos I'd reviewed that morning that I wish I could unsee. Police reports detailing a violent altercation. Medical examiner's findings. Witness statements, evidence logs, and disturbing details about attempts to cover up what happened that November night. I looked at Brandon Collins standing at the defense table, adjusting his expensive cufflinks like he was preparing for a business meeting rather than a murder trial. Then I looked at Rebecca Mitchell, clutching that photograph of her daughter, the daughter she'd never see graduate, never see become a teacher, never see get married or have children or grow old. The contrast was stark and painful. One person treated this like an inconvenience. The other had her entire world destroyed. Christina, my court clerk who'd worked with me for 20 years, leaned over and whispered quietly, "Judge, this one's going to be difficult." Difficult. That was putting it mildly. Because what I was about to witness wasn't just a trial. It was a test of whether justice could function when power, money, and political connections tried to purchase immunity from consequences. Whether a mother's grief mattered as much as a mayor's reputation. Whether the life of a working-class college student was worth the same under the law as the freedom of a privileged heir to political power. I took a deep breath, adjusted my glasses, and prepared for what I knew would be one of the most important cases of my career. Because Sarah Mitchell deserved justice, and Rebecca Mitchell deserved to see her daughter's killer held accountable, regardless of whose son he was. The bailiff called the courtroom to order. All rise for the Honorable Judge Frank Caprio. Everyone stood. Everyone except Brandon Collins, who remained seated for a deliberate extra 3 seconds before slowly, lazily rising to his feet like he was doing me a personal favor. That small act of disrespect told me everything I needed to know about how he viewed this proceeding. "Mr. Collins," I began, looking directly at him over my reading glasses, "you stand charged with second-degree murder in the death of Sarah Mitchell, evidence tampering, and obstruction of justice. How do you plead?" Before he could open his mouth, Richard Brennan stepped forward smoothly. "Your Honor, my client pleads not guilty to all charges. We believe the evidence will show this was a tragic accident that the prosecution has grossly mischaracterized as a crime. Mr. Collins and Miss Mitchell were in a relationship. What occurred was an unfortunate domestic dispute that ended tragically, but without criminal intent. Tragic accident. Unfortunate domestic dispute. The legal language designed to strip away the horror of what actually happened, to make murder sound like a misunderstanding between two people who simply had bad luck. I looked at Rebecca Mitchell in the gallery. At the mention of her daughter's death being called an accident, she closed her eyes and a fresh tear rolled down her cheek. Her hand gripped that photograph tighter. "Mr. Brennan," I said carefully, "we'll let the evidence speak to intent. Prosecutor Chen, please present your opening statement." Jennifer Chen stood, a veteran prosecutor with 15 years of experience and a reputation for thorough, meticulous case preparation. She approached the bench with a thick folder and a tablet computer. "Your Honor, the evidence will show that on November 18th, at approximately 11:30 p.m., Brandon Collins murdered Sarah Mitchell in his apartment at the Meridian Luxury Condominiums. This was not an accident. This was not a dispute that got out of hand. This was a violent assault that ended with a 22-year-old woman's death, followed by calculated attempts to cover up what happened." She paused, letting that sink in. "We have forensic evidence, witness testimony, and the defendant's own actions that night that paint a clear picture of guilt. We also have evidence of attempts to tamper with the crime scene, pressure witnesses, and use family connections to interfere with the investigation." Brandon Collins yawned. Actually yawned, covering his mouth with his manicured hand like he was sitting through a boring lecture rather than his own murder trial. Several people in the gallery gasped at the audacity. "Mr. Collins," I said sharply, "this is a murder trial, not a tedious business meeting. I expect you to show appropriate respect for these proceedings and for the victim." He looked at me with those cold eyes and shrugged slightly. "My apologies, Your Honor. I didn't sleep well last night. These charges are stressful, you understand." Didn't sleep well. Sarah Mitchell would never sleep again, and he was complaining about one bad night's rest. "Prosecutor Chen," I continued, "please proceed with your evidence." She nodded and activated the courtroom monitor. "Your Honor, I'd like to present the 911 call made at 11:47 p.m. on November 18th. This call was made by Catherine Reynolds, a neighbor in the defendant's building." The courtroom went silent as the audio began to play. The voice that came through the speakers was panicked, breathless. 911, what's your emergency? I need help. I can hear someone screaming in the apartment next to mine, 4B. It sounds like a woman, and she's screaming for help. There's crashing, things breaking. Please send someone. Ma'am, what's the address? Meridian Condominiums, 455 Benefit Street, 4th floor. Please hurry. The screaming just stopped and now I don't hear anything. Oh God, please hurry. The audio ended. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. I looked at Brandon Collins. His expression hadn't changed. No emotion, no reaction, nothing. Like he was listening to a weather report. Your Honor, Chen continued. Police arrived at 11:53 p.m., 6 minutes after this call. When they knocked on apartment 4B, the defendant answered the door. He appeared calm, composed. He told officers that Miss Mitchell had left approximately an hour earlier after an argument, and he didn't know where she'd gone. He denied any physical altercation. He denied that anyone had been screaming. She pulled up crime scene photos on the monitor. But when officers noticed blood on the defendant's shirt and requested to look inside the apartment, they found this. The photos showed an upscale living room in complete disarray. Furniture overturned, a lamp shattered on the floor, a coffee table with a cracked glass top, and blood. Smears of blood on the white carpet, drops on the overturned couch, a small pool near the balcony door. And on the balcony, Chen said quietly, pulling up the next photo, 4 floors below, they found Sarah Mitchell's body. Rebecca Mitchell let out a sob that echoed through the courtroom. Her hand went to her mouth, even though she'd surely seen these photos before, heard this testimony before. The pain was fresh every single time. I had to pause for a moment, let her collect herself. A victim advocate sitting beside her put an arm around her shoulders, handed her tissues, whispered something comforting that I couldn't hear. Brandon Collins examined his fingernails, bored. Prosecutor Chen, I said, my voice harder than before. What did the medical examiner determine was the cause of death? Blunt force trauma to the head consistent with a fall from significant height, Your Honor. But the autopsy revealed additional injuries sustained before the fall. Defensive wounds on her hands and arms. Bruising around her throat consistent with strangulation. Facial injuries indicating she'd been struck multiple times before she went over that balcony. The careful language, because they couldn't definitively prove whether Sarah Mitchell fell, jumped in desperation to escape, or was pushed. But the evidence suggested she was fighting for her life before she died. Mr. Collins, I said, looking directly at him, do you have anything to say about what we've just heard? He glanced at his attorney, who nodded slightly. Then he looked at me with those empty eyes and said, Your Honor, I loved Sarah. What happened that night was a terrible accident. We argued, yes. Things got heated. But I never wanted her to die. This is all just a tragic misunderstanding that's being blown completely out of proportion. A tragic misunderstanding. A woman with strangulation marks and facial injuries who ended up dead 4 floors below his balcony was a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding, I repeated slowly, letting the word hang in the air. Mr. Collins, Prosecutor Chen, please present the rest of your evidence. Chen pulled up text messages on the monitor. Your Honor, these are messages Sarah Mitchell sent to her roommate, Jessica Torres, in the weeks before her death. The messages appeared on screen, time-stamped and preserved. Brandon got angry again tonight when I talked to a guy from my study group. He grabbed my arm so hard it left bruises. I'm scared. He says if I ever leave him, he'll make sure I regret it. He told me his father can make problems disappear, that nobody would believe me over him. The final message, sent the day she died. Going to break up with him tonight. Wish me luck. I can't do this anymore. Rebecca Mitchell was crying openly now, her shoulders shaking. Jessica Torres, a young woman in her early 20s sitting 3 rows back, had tears streaming down her face. She'd been Sarah's best friend, her roommate, the last person Sarah confided in before she died. Your Honor, Chen continued, we also have testimony from the defendant's doorman, Marcus Webb, who saw Miss Mitchell arrive that night at 10:45 p.m. He described her as nervous but determined. At 11:52 p.m., he saw the defendant leave the building alone, get into his car, and drive away. He returned at 1:30 a.m., after police had already arrived. Brandon's attorney stood immediately. Your Honor, my client left to clear his head after discovering what happened. He was in shock, traumatized. He was fleeing the scene, Chen interrupted. And during those 2 hours, he made 3 phone calls. One to his father, Mayor Collins, one to the family attorney, and one to a professional cleaning service specializing in crime scene cleanup. The courtroom erupted in whispers. I had to bang my gavel twice. Order! Brandon Collins finally showed emotion, irritation. He leaned over to his attorney and whispered something sharp, gesturing dismissively at the prosecutor. Mr. Collins, I said, do you have something to say to the court? He stood up without his attorney's permission, straightening his expensive suit jacket. Your Honor, I think we all know what this is really about. My father is running for governor. This is a politically motivated prosecution designed to damage his campaign. Sarah's death was tragic, but I'm being used as a political pawn. Political pawn. This man just called his girlfriend's murder a political inconvenience for his father's campaign. I set down my gavel very carefully, the way I do when I'm about to say something I've been holding back for too long. Mr. Collins, I said, standing up from my bench, something I rarely do, but when I do it, people know I'm deadly serious. Sit down and listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you. He remained standing for a moment, defiant. Then his attorney pulled him down by his arm. The smirk was gone now, replaced by something that looked almost like concern. Almost. For 40 years I've sat on this bench. I've seen poverty drive people to desperate crimes. I've seen addiction destroy families. I've seen good people make terrible mistakes in moments of weakness. But you know what I haven't seen very often? I haven't seen someone look at a murdered young woman and see only how it affects their family's political ambitions. I walked down from the bench, something I almost never do. I approached the evidence table where Sarah Mitchell's photograph sat among the case files. I picked it up, held it so everyone in the courtroom could see. This is Sarah Mitchell, 22 years old. She wanted to be a teacher. She volunteered with homeless children. She worked her way through college because her mother couldn't afford tuition. She had dreams, Mr. Collins. She had a future. She had a mother who loved her more than anything in this world. I turned to Rebecca Mitchell. Mrs. Mitchell, would you like to say something to the court? She stood slowly, trembling, clutching that same photograph. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, but in the silent courtroom every word carried. My daughter called me the night she died, she said, her voice breaking. At 6:30 p.m., before she went to his apartment, she told me she was finally going to end the relationship. She said she was scared, but that she couldn't live in fear anymore. I told her I was proud of her. I told her to be safe. I told her I loved her. Tears streamed down her face. Those were the last words I ever said to my baby girl. The next call I got was from the police at 2 a.m., telling me Sarah was dead. They asked me to come identify her body. Do you know what that's like, Your Honor? To see your child on a metal table in a morgue? To see bruises on her throat, blood in her hair? To know she died terrified and in pain? She turned to face Brandon Collins directly. You took everything from me. You took my only child. You took my future, the grandchildren I'll never have, the wedding I'll never see, the phone calls and Sunday dinners and holidays we'll never share. And you stand there in your expensive suit, talking about political campaigns and misunderstandings, like my daughter's life meant nothing. Brandon Collins looked away, uncomfortable for the first time. His attorneys were whispering urgently to each other. Mrs. Mitchell, I said gently, Thank you for your courage. Please sit down. I turned back to Brandon Collins and my voice turned to ice. Mr. Collins, let me tell you about power. You think power is your father's position as mayor. You think power is expensive lawyers and political connections. You think power is the ability to make phone calls and hire cleaning crews and expect the system to protect you because of whose son you are. I leaned forward, looking him directly in the eyes. But real power, Mr. Collins, is the power of justice. The power to ensure that a working-class college student matters just as much under the law as a mayor's son. The power to tell wealthy, connected families that they don't get to buy their way out of consequences for taking a human life. I returned to my bench and opened the sentencing guidelines. The evidence presented here is overwhelming. Witness testimony placing you at the scene. Forensic evidence of a violent struggle. Text messages showing a pattern of threats and abuse. Your own suspicious behavior. Fleeing the scene, calling lawyers before calling for help, attempting to clean up evidence. His lead attorney stood quickly. Your Honor, we request a continuance to prepare additional witnesses and… Request denied. Mr. Collins, I find you guilty of second-degree murder, evidence tampering, and obstruction of justice. The courtroom erupted. Brandon Collins's face went white. His attorneys started talking over each other, shuffling papers frantically. Rebecca Mitchell collapsed back into her seat, sobbing with what sounded like relief and grief mixed together. Here is your sentence, I continued, my voice cutting through the chaos. 25 years to life in state prison for murder. 5 additional years for evidence tampering. 3 years for obstruction, to run consecutively. That's a minimum of 33 years before you're eligible for parole. Your Honor, please, Brandon started to say. I'm not finished. You will also pay full restitution to Mrs. Mitchell for funeral expenses, counseling, and lost companionship. Every penny of your trust fund, if necessary. You will write a detailed letter of apology, not crafted by your attorneys, written by you in your own words, acknowledging what you did and taking full responsibility. Brandon Collins was no longer smirking. His hands were shaking. His expensive attorneys looked stunned. Your Honor, Richard Brennan said, his professional composure cracking. My client is 24 years old. This sentence is justice, Counselor. Your client took a life, a bright, kind, promising young life. He showed no remorse. He blamed politics. He called murder a misunderstanding. He deserves every single year of this sentence. I looked at Brandon Collins one last time. Your father may be mayor. He may run for governor. He may have all the political power in this state. But in this courtroom, none of that matters. What matters is that Sarah Mitchell deserved to live, and you took that from her. What matters is that Rebecca Mitchell deserves justice, and today she's getting it. I brought the gavel down. Bailiff, take Mr. Collins into custody. Court is adjourned. As they led Brandon Collins away in handcuffs, he looked back at his attorneys desperately. Call my father. He'll fix this. He has to fix this. Mr. Collins, I said quietly, your father can't fix this. No one can. You'll face the consequences of what you did. Rebecca Mitchell approached my bench after the courtroom cleared. Your Honor, she said, her voice still shaking, thank you. Thank you for seeing Sarah as a person, not just a case file. Thank you for making him pay. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm so sorry for your loss. Sarah deserves so much better than what happened to her. 6 months later, I received a letter from Rebecca. She'd started a foundation in Sarah's name, providing support for young women in abusive relationships. She'd helped 12 women leave dangerous situations. Judge Caprio, she wrote, Sarah's life mattered. You proved that in your courtroom. Now I'm making sure her death means something too. Brandon Collins is currently serving his sentence at the state penitentiary. No early release, no special treatment. Because in my courtroom, justice isn't for sale. I'm Frank Caprio. Remember, the law protects everyone equally.